Welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name is Joelle and we talk all about sociology, life as a sociology graduate and all that fun stuff. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down feminism as a theory. Finally. It's been so long in the works and I spent ages on it, so I'm really hoping that it's going to be helpful and informative. Now, we'll be covering notable theorists, main concepts, critiques, and feminism today. This is a massive theory which has loads of movements and subtopics, and of course is still evolving today, but I'm going to be doing my best to condense it into what is useful and helpful for you on a general knowledge level and also at a uni and A-level level. And of course, you should dive into whatever topic or area you find the most interesting and is the most helpful for your studies. So let's dive right in. So let's talk about notable theories that you might come across at A-level or university. First of all, we have bell hooks. Bell hooks was a groundbreaking writer on feminist, gender, and radical politics. Bell hooks was most known for her work that crossed intersections of identities, race, gender, class, etc., which was amazing because not a lot of writers would do that and still don't do that. Her works Ain't I a Woman and Feminist Theory from Margin to Centre cemented her role in radical feminist thought, centering the experiences of Black women, which was really amazing in her day and is really still influential in today's feminist thought. And if you're interested in learning more about intersectional feminism, bell hooks books are well worth the read. And it's also worth noting that her name is spelled with uncapitalized letters, lowercase letters, to emphasize the subverting of what is the norm, what is patriarchy, and all of that. Second of all, we have Sylvia Walby. Sylvia Walby is a British sociologist based at City University of London, and she is most well known for works in the area of patriarchy, gender, relations in the workplace, and more. She is also a UNESCO chair in gender research and received an OBE for services to equal opportunities and diversity. So she is a great one to look at as well if you're interested in those kind of areas of gender and workplace diversity. And personally, one of my favourites, Judith Butler. Judith Butler is an American philosopher whose works are mostly in the realm of gender, with her best known works being Gender Trouble, Feminism, and the Subversion of Identity. And I came across her in my third year, also second year. We did a module on gender, sexuality, science, and technology. It is a mouthful. It was really interesting, and we used quite a lot of Judith Butler's work in identifying, what is gender? What is it? And does it apply? Especially, how does it affect people who want humans? How does it affect them? So it's really interesting. Butler is a highly recommended sociologist / philosopher. And her biggest contributions arguably was that gender is created through action and speech, which is more micro level stuff, which I talk more about, including symbolic interactionism in this video. So let's now talk about the main concepts. There are many main concepts in feminism, however, let's go through the main ones. These are the most central and main to the understanding of feminism as a theory. First of all, we have obviously the patriarchy. This is central to feminism and the basis on which the theory is founded upon. So women are collectively separated from power, wealth, and influence than men are. And this is where Walby comes in, Sylvia Walby, in which we mentioned in the notable theory section. Patriarchy is perpetuated through mode of production, paid work, the state, male violence, sexuality, and culture. So all of these aspects come together to oppress women under the theory of feminism. And if we go through them one by one, mode of production, household, gender, jobs and roles, household, work, childcare and care, these are all things that bound women to a certain mode of production, and a certain mode of production that isn't as valued as proper work. So, going to a 9 to 5, going to an actual salary job. However, if you think about it, a lot of women do a lot of voluntary work that is basically a full-time job. Raising children is a full-time job, which isn't seen as prestigious or is worthy of pay in the same way as men are in other, most work. And is that surprising? Probably not, because men traditionally and usually in history and a lot of the case today aren't involved in childcare or care in general as much. And that leads on nicely into paid work. What is paid, what isn't, which is valued, which isn't. At the state, patriarchy runs deep in both a micro and a macro level, in capitalism and in the public sphere. So it's all around us. It's not just a small isolated incident that is just, there, but it runs deep. It runs deep in the roots of what capitalism is. Fourthly, we have male violence. So it's a form of control of women, physically as well as psychological. And when we talk about violence, it's not just, domestic abuse, although that is, rife and a big problem. And we have unfortunate incidents where women are killed because of male violence. A lot have happened in the news, for example, recently in the last few years, which is really, really horrible. But it's just to know that that is a cause in Warby's eyes and how patriarchy is perpetuated. Also we have sexuality, so dominant heterosexist discourse that is hypocritical. So of course, lads are gonna be lads, they're gonna go around, whereas women are gonna be shamed for being whores or sluts and stuff, right? So that's another hypocrisy that we have right there in terms of sexuality. Who is allowed to explore their sexuality and not? Of course, if we're speaking in men and women terms, we're ignoring all the fluidity and non-binary in between. So that's one important thing to note. Culture-wise, things like the male gaze and is prolific across media and, in everyday life. We're really used to seeing the world from a male perspective, and especially when we're talking about women and their objectification. And of course, this also intersects with other areas of marginalization, for example, class, race, sexuality, and ability, and much more. And then next concept we have is the different waves of feminism. And no, I'm not talking about the C word here, in different waves. But it's generally agreed there are 4-ish waves so far. There's not much consensus on what characteristics characterize each wave. So let's go through each of them briefly. For the sake of simplicity, I'll list some general main aims of each wave. So the first wave was all about suffrage and equal rights, marching down the streets with placards with the equal rights and equal votes. The main aim was getting the voting rights for women. This was about gaining the vote, but didn't want to really change the system. They just wanted to join the system. Women wanted to be in on what men were in because they viewed that as equal rights at the time. It's important to remember, whilst political rights were gained, it wasn't for all women universally. Namely, black women weren't allowed to vote in the US until 45 years later in 1965. Now, the second wave was all about equality between the 60s and the 90s. The second wave came alongside other movements like anti-war and other movements alongside minority groups. And this included the pill, control over contraception, equality, the ability to bear children was really the reason for the oppression of women in that kind of space. So they thought, we need to have equality, we need to have control and power over our bodies. And the second wave was also much more aware of how women's issues are embedded in the political system. For example, the personal is political, which we'll get into in a second. Now, for the third wave, it came in the 90s. So this was a subjugation of what the first and second waves would call oppression, really. Dressing and reclaiming the femininity of what it means to be a woman, dressing all sexy and, going out and wearing skimpy clothes and things like that, which, first and second wave feminism could deem as oppressing yourself. First and second wave was all about, becoming like men almost. But the third wave was about reclaiming what it means to be feminine and reversing that, claiming it back, claiming the power back from men almost. And there was a lot more awareness around gender, heteronormativity, and that there are more genders than just men and women as in the traditional stereotype way. And interestingly, what I read in research was that this wave were the most likely to not consider themselves as feminists because that had negative connotations which attach themselves to first and second waves feminists. So in terms of the fourth wave, this was the 2010s and beyond. So we're kind of in that fourth wave, riding that wave. As this is more recent, obviously it's a lot more challenging to define, but there's definitely a lot more talk around intersectionality and acknowledging that women of colour need to be in the conversation. They need to be in the conversation. Is this actually the case though, is my thinking, in the public sphere, or is this just talk about including them in conversation? It's just this talk about increasing diversity and inclusivity in companies with more women at the top, but is this actually changing anything foundationally, are we actually changing what capitalism has embedded into the system, i.e. patriarchy? And unfortunately, we can see that feminism has also been co-opted by companies and individuals and groups that would use this like pinkwashing for their own gain. So that's something to look out for. And of course, the rise of awareness of trans women and how that affects the concept of womanhood and gender have been widely debated in the public sphere today, which is an indication that we really haven't moved past that much of the traditional ideals of patriarchy, even though, we might want to think that we have moved past those traditional normative ideas of patriarchy. So for the third concept, I wanted to talk a bit about the personal is political. Firstly, this is not about how women's actions contribute to their oppression, right? I just want to make that very clear from the start. It is about how interpersonal and individual actions and interactions are inherently political, and you can't just say, oh, it's just me. It's not just the individual. Because when these actions are large, common, and widespread, clearly it's a much bigger and deeper issue at its root. And hence this becomes a political issue too, because one's personal experiences, relation to power and relationship can be traced, and that is how political power is formed out. Your relationship to power, your relationship to politics. Are you involved? How much are you involved? And therefore, how much every single action affects that. Carol Hainish, 1969, writes about how women's groups were referred to as therapy and just talking about personal issues. However, it's clearly much deeper, and let me just read an extract from her article. She says, therapy assumes that someone is sick and that there is a cue, for example, a personal solution. I am greatly offended that I or any other woman is thought to need therapy in the first place. Women are messed over, not messed up. Now, this is not to say that I don't condone therapy, because therapy is inherently very useful, I think, especially for self-awareness, but that is not to replace or to negate the fact that our experiences are rooted in the structural. Our individual experiences inform the structural, the structural informs our personal experiences. And through these discussions with other women, these people in the therapy group made these connections and realised actually it's not just me, and this is clearly a bigger issue. And in short, the issues that women, encompassing all women, face are not rooted in their personal action and situation, but can be traced up to a societal level. And it's really important to note that this is the case with the marginalisation of other minority groups as well. It's not individual actions. Individual actions matter, but they're rooted in a larger system. So moving on to some critiques of feminism, this is going to be interesting. Here are the main ones. Is feminism understood? Right, when we say feminism, we throw feminism around, we need to be feminist, we need to be empowering women. But actually, what does this mean? What does empowering women mean? Does feminism actually mean empowering women? And is this all women? What kind of women, right? So when I say feminism, do I actually know what it means? Yes, on a kind of base level, but it's really important to think about how it actually applies to you and how this applies into the real world and your work, because feminism is an ever-changing issue. 100 years ago, we wouldn't have talked about intersectional issues, intersectional identities, right? Because we think women are just women, feminism isn't just a women's issue. But no, feminism has to encompass women of colour, women of various abilities, sexualities, etc., for it to be inclusive. Especially because feminism still isn't widely understood, and some people will still say that they don't agree with feminism because they think it's just like man-hating, for example. Secondly, following from my last point, is feminism inclusive? That's something to think about. And for a long time, feminism hasn't really taken into account women of colour or trans women's experiences, for example. And this is really prevalent even today with some notable authors and big names, politicians, not taking this into account and not acknowledging all women's experiences. And of course, that depends on what your definition of a woman is. And sometimes white feminism can be seen to be more aligned with patriarchy than it is with women's liberation. And technically, it could be seen to be more aligned with the idea of getting on equal footing with men, rather than liberating all women whilst, not being in that framework of patriarchy and capitalism. So that's all really tied deeply together. And my last critique is feminism still relevant? I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but that's just something to think about. As with a lot of political and social justice movements, if you spend a lot of time in these spaces, it can really drain you. It can be more about doing the right thing, seeming like you're doing the right thing, instead of actually doing what's right. And that is the case when I talked about pinkwashing with companies, influencers, and various groups and people, and newspapers and big institutions like that, right? Carol Hainish says, I think we who work full-time in the movement tend to become very narrow. So it's really interesting to know that those who are really looking at feminism, really hyper-focus on feminism, that's all you see. And that's something that I fell into as well with a lot of social justice movements. I was like, this is what I'm focusing on, but we need to look at the wider issue, the bigger issue, combine it with all of these bigger issues that are at the root of capitalism, right? So it's really important to keep a broad mind on how to engage more people to overcome the patriarchy and how we can overturn this as a system. But again, these are just some criticisms to keep in mind. So what is up with feminism today? And a little summary of everything we've covered. So rise in understanding for equality for women, such as International Women's Day, a lot of great events, and also tragic events like the death of Sarah Everard, have placed women's safety high in the public consciousness, which is really important, obviously. Basic safety is important for everyone. However, intersectionality with other identity is not well understood. What about the murder of the school teacher, Sabina Nessa? What about the massacre of the Asian women in the spa in Atlanta? The intricacies of women's oppression are as deep as they are as broad. So that begs the question, what is feminism? What is the future of feminism? What is feminism today? What does it mean to you, right? Is it inclusive of all women? What does women actually mean? So this is just some food for thought as to think about how the theories we come across in sociology are rooted in real life. So I hope this video was really helpful for you, just to get you thinking about feminism and really give you a refresh as we head into exam season. So very best of luck to everyone doing exams, and I hope this was useful. As always, any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!